Since 1988, LueRachelle Brim-Atkins has owned the consulting firm Brim-Donahoe and Associates, where she consults with Fortune 100 businesses, public, private, and nonprofit organizations, and boards. She and her husband, Michael, had the honor of caring for her mother and brother in their home for 4 years. When the physical burden of lifting two loved ones to and from wheelchairs became too much, they cared for them in a nearby adult family home until their deaths. Today, LueRachelle will be speaking to us in a presentation entitled Caring for Mom, Stories of Community. In this presentation, she will share insightful and touching reflections on her experience as a caregiver out and about in the community with her mother. Her stories about time at the local senior center, church, businesses, and more will shed light on what makes a community dementia-friendly and why a dementia-friendly community is so important in the lives of people with dementia and their families. After she shares, we'll hear brief responses from several people connected to the parts of the community that she'll reflect on, and then we'll open up for question and answer. With no further ado, it's my pleasure again to warmly welcome LueRachelle Brim-Atkins to this virtual stage. Welcome.
Thank you, Mary Grace. Good morning, everyone. I am really pleased to be here. I'll let you know up front, I'm having my house painted, so I hope you don't hear ladders clanking in the background. I'm really pleased to be here today. I'm feeling, Mary Grace said she was feeling a little emotional this morning. I am as well, because I get to talk about my mom, and that video was just beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So I'm going to be talking about my relationship and final years with my mother, and a little bit about my brother, both of whom Michael and I, my husband and I, cared for in our home for 4 years. But before I talk with you about my time as their caregiver, I want to tell you a little bit about my mother before she had a stroke at age 90. My mother was not always 90 years old. She was once a young woman, and I want to share a picture of her with you as a young woman. And that's important to me because I think that sometimes as people age, we forget that they were once young. And so I wanted to share that picture with you. My mom was born in 1913. Her parents, my grandparents, were both teachers, but her mother died in the influenza epidemic of 1919, and my mother was 6 years old. My mother said she went to school that morning. Her mother and her baby brother were both alive, and she came home from school and they were both dead. My mother never got over that. She lived a beautiful, rich, and full life, but she never got over losing her mother that early. And as a result of her mother's, early death, my mom was deathly afraid of viruses. If you sneezed around her, she would lean away and give you the evil eye. My brother used to tease her and say, "Mother wouldn't even talk to you on the phone if you had a cold." She would not have done well in this pandemic. My mother was a public school teacher who raised 3 children with the help of my grandparents after divorcing our dad. And my brother William, who I'll talk briefly about today, was born in 1945, just after World War II ended. My brother had always been in poor health because at birth, a German-American doctor, Dr. Dietz, had deliberately dropped him at birth. My mom was told that she should be glad the doctor had not killed him because he usually killed the Black boy babies in that area. They were in Louisiana, and my brother was lucky enough to have lived, but he suffered from grand mal epilepsy, was paralyzed on his left side, and suffered with cognitive challenges all his life. For this reason, although I was the middle child, I always functioned as the older child. And my baby brother, Cecil, says that you can tell that I functioned as the older child. I take that as a compliment. I'm not sure he means it that way. So more about my mom. When I went away to college, my mom showed up for every performance I was in. And when I decided to attend the University of Texas, she and my grandfather drove me to Austin to take the SAT. And they did this against my grandmother's wishes because my grandmother had her ideas where I should attend college. And it was not the University of Texas that was recently integrating. I adored my grandmother, and I was truly impressed that my mother stood up to her. That's a whole different story. My mother had lots of secrets that she didn't tell us. For example, she sewed underwear for a friend of hers who was going away to college because this friend had very little money. And she never breathed a word about it. And the friend is the one who told me 40 years after my mother had done that. My mother cooked and served dinner to a woman and her children, though that woman had hurt my mother in immeasurable ways. Once I asked my mother what she thought about gay people, and she said, none of us has anything to say about how we are made. None of us. My mother loved her children fiercely and took some pretty remarkable stances to protect us, including answering a white school board member who asked her whether she believed in integration. My mother responded, "We want the same things for our children that you want for yours, and if it takes integration, so be it." That white man thought that was the wrong answer and saw to it that as a school board member, saw to it that my mother's teaching contract was not renewed the next year. My mother didn't stop. She just kept going. Mother was born during the Depression, and she saved scraps of aluminum foil to reuse and never threw away any food. When she'd come to visit us in Seattle and she'd see all these blackberries on the vines unpicked, my mother would say, "You can tell there's no depression. There are berries on the vines." My mom played the piano. She had a beautiful voice. She was introverted and didn't talk a lot, but when she did speak, we listened. She seemed to have a pithy saying for every situation, like, "Every crow thinks hers is the blackest," or "Every tub has to stand on its own bottom," or this is my favorite one. When I would be in a quandary trying to think of what to do, my mother would say, "If in doubt, don't." And that has served me so well over the years. She also said, "An idle mind is the devil's workshop." And my brother's favorite, "A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still." Mother loved to travel. She went to Oberammergau, Germany to see the Passion Play. She traveled to Seattle to see the World's Fair. She and my brother William traveled with me to Hong Kong and Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, and Malaysia so that she could see as much of the world as she could before glaucoma would take her vision in later years. My mother reminds me of a Maya Angelou poem on aging. Maya Angelou said, "When you see me sitting quietly like a sack on a shelf, don't think I need your chattering. I'm listening to myself. Hold, stop, don't pity me. Hold, stop your sympathy. Understanding if you got it, otherwise I'll do without it. When my bones are stiff and aching and my feet won't climb the stair, I will only ask one favor. Don't bring me a rocking chair. When you see me walking, stumbling, don't study and get it wrong, because tired don't mean lazy and every goodbye ain't gone. I'm the same person I was back then, a little less hair, a little less chin, a lot less lungs and much less wind. But ain't I lucky? I can still breathe in." My mother retired early from teaching because of progressive glaucoma, but she never gave up her effort to see. Even when her vision had become the size of a pinhead, she'd comment on how pretty the colors were in our clothes. My mother was awesome. I learned to travel watching my mother and decided I've gone to 27 countries, some multiple times, because I want to be like my mama. When my mother began to lose her battle with glaucoma, they relocated to Seattle from Los Angeles to be near my younger brother and Michael and me. They lived in a condo on Lake Washington, 6 minutes from my house, had a marvelous view. One of my friends teased and said, I don't know why you put Mother Brim in that condo with that view when you know she can't see it. But she enjoyed what little of the view she could see. And the condo was a lovely place for her community to gather with her. One Sunday morning at age 90, my mother had a stroke. She was lethargic when I went to help her get dressed for church, but I didn't recognize the signs of the stroke. I took her to the hospital later and they told us the news. I still feel guilty for not knowing how to recognize a stroke. I work with that feeling because when I told my mother, she said, it's not your fault. When the dementia set in, my mother thought she saw little creatures in the air and she would swipe at them. She gradually became better and the creatures went away. She was frightened of them and I was frightened for her. I didn't know that I should not try to keep her mind on this side. So I would gently correct what I thought she was thinking she was seeing. I didn't know that I should just go with the flow of whatever her imaginings were. I just didn't know. There was so much to do when my mother had the stroke. Resources I knew nothing about had to be gathered and digested and called and scheduled and vetted and fired and replaced and instructed and welcomed into our home. I was so sad and afraid for this glorious mother of mine who was now completely dependent on us. However, I have been so blessed with an amazing village. Having come to Seattle with the only family being cousins who left the city after they finished graduate school at the UW, my friends from church and I created a village so that our children could grow up with cousins and aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters. We celebrated holidays together. We even called it a village. We had potluck dinners together, especially when we were broke. We helped raise each other's children. And after my husband, Michael, and I got married, and anytime some silverware or tableware went missing, Michael would say, oh, don't worry, it's someplace in the village. The village would also serve us in great stead when my mom and brother relocated to Seattle. The village people, who were by now kinfolk, became significant players in my life when we began taking care of my mother and William. They called them regularly. They picked them up to take them places. They checked on their overall well-being. They were my first dementia-friendly community. So I recommend to anyone, get yourself some peeps. People whom you can form long-lasting reciprocal relationships. People I say are my ride and die peeps. So I want to give you a glimpse of how my community, my village, my peeps helped me become successful in caring for my mom and brother. So my people that I grew up with, my birth family, were Baptists. My grandmother once told me, I'm a Baptist born and a Baptist bred, and when I die, I'll be a Baptist dead. That's how Baptist they were. Though I had grown up Baptist, when I moved to Seattle, I became an African Methodist Episcopal. Mother and William would visit my church, but as I said, they were Baptists. I tried to convert those people, but they weren't having it. So I would have to run between Mount Zion Baptist Church and First AME Church. I dropped them off at the door, and their dementia-friendly community would wait at the door for them, take them into Mount Zion to their Sunday school class, and pick them up from the Sunday school class to take them to their pew in the church. And my church had longer services than theirs. They would wait at the front door with my mother and brother until I got there to pick them up. Now, I think that's a dementia-friendly community. My mom and I loved to run around town together. And at one time, I had a cute little red BMW sports car. Yeah, I was cute. And I let the top down, and my mother and I would go cruising. But as I said, my mother was always afraid of catching a cold. So she was not at all impressed with the fact that I let the top down, though I thought we looked pretty cool anyway. I always took her to what we call the Naked Lady Spa in Lakewood. Some of you may know it. Now keep in mind, my mother by this time was almost totally blind and had had a stroke. But on one occasion, she walked into the warm bathing pools and people made space for her. They talked with her. They asked how she liked the spa. Her response was, "I'm just waiting to see what date my daughter is making another appointment for us." They were a dementia-friendly community in the pool at that spa. One day it was time for us to get our massages, and my mother went into the massage room and I went into mine, but she panicked. The stroke gave her panic attacks. And a few minutes into the massage therapist came to get me because my mother was asking for me. But those therapists were so supportive and seemed to understand what was going on. Again, dementia friendly. A group of friends and I were traveling to Mexico one summer, and I asked Mother if she wanted to go, and she said, "What day do I need to be packed?" I was concerned about how I was going to manage Mother in Mexico, but my friends would come every day and they'd take her arm and walk her down those cobblestone streets in Old Puerto Vallarta. And it was as though she was the mother to all of them. Again, dementia-friendly peeps. So I'm an independent consultant and I travel all around the country for my work. And often my mother and my brother William and my children would meet me on the weekends when I was out of state, and we'd go sightseeing. Philadelphia, Amish country, Boston, you name it. Mother was ready to go. Airline personnel, hotel staff were all supportive of me and my mom. I think I got better service because I was with her. Now, don't think that my mom and I didn't have some bumps on the road. I'll give you my most fun example. I'm a member of a team called the Vision and Planning Team. And we do work in Kenya, in East Africa. And we would meet once a month. And after Mother and William moved in with me, I didn't want Michael to have to be the sitter when I'd have to go to meetings. So I asked my friends on the team if we could meet at my home. And they said yes. But one month we were about to meet, and I got Mother out of her bed. I put her on the toilet. And when I had given her sufficient time, I went back to get her off the toilet to put her back in bed. And my mother said, "Go on and have your little meeting. I'm not getting off this toilet." And I said, "Oh no, Mother, the meeting hasn't started yet. It's okay, I can get you. I'm not getting off this toilet." So this was her little mutiny, you know? So I would try to pick her up anyway, and she would bear down on the toilet. So I said to one of my friends on the Vision and Planning team, "Would you go in there and get your mama off the toilet for me, please?" So she went, "Mother Brim, are you ready to get off the toilet?" "I'm not getting off this toilet. Would you people leave me alone?" And she tried to lift her up and she bore down again. Another friend came in. "Miss Brim, are you ready to get up?" "I know she sent you in here." I'm not getting off this toilet. So she didn't get up. My husband went in. He said, Mother, are you ready to get off the toilet? Would you people leave me alone? This is her way of saying to me, she didn't appreciate sharing me. And I got that, but I was also trying to keep living my life, right? Do what I had to do, make it, yeah. So finally, I have a friend on the vision and planning team, Dawn Mason, who is a former Washington state legislator. And though she had retired from the legislature, when my mother came to Seattle, my mother always called her legislator. So my friend Dawn went in, she said to my mother, Mother Brim, I don't know anything about old people. She said, my grandparents died when I was young. I've never grown up around old people, but you need to get your ass off this toilet and let these people put you in the bed. My mother tried her best not to smile. I mean, she worked on it. She was like, but then she had to break into this grin. Now, had I said that to my mother, she would probably still be alive so she could talk about me. But Dawn said it, and we got to put her in the bed because, and so we told Dawn, we owe you for that one. I was taking a porcelain doll making class, and my mother did not like for me to go to that class because she saw that as discretionary time that I could spend with her. She'd say, why do you have to make all those dolls? What are you going to do with all those dolls? Well, make me one of those dolls. Now, my mother was blind, and this is porcelain. So that didn't make a lot of sense, but I got the message, get away from the class and stay with me. So I did that. Actually, it was a wise decision because I have no idea what I'm going to do with all these porcelain dolls. Once again, my mother was right. So another bump on the road was at a senior center when a man was taking photographs and thought that he should convince my mother to buy more photos than she needed or than she wanted. And she tried to tell him that, but somehow he insisted and she got this big bill. So I had to call the director of the senior center and tell her what had happened. She called the photographer's office, told them what had happened. She told me to tell my mother she didn't have to pay for any pictures because he should not have done that, and that this man would not be coming back to that senior center. I appreciated that because she took care of my mother's needs and didn't let someone take advantage of her. Some areas where I think there might be some problems. My mother had difficulty with taxi drivers. So when they would come to pick Mother and William up to go to the senior center, they blow the horn, never get out of the car, never open a door. So that's one area that I think people could use some help with, helping taxi drivers understand. And he'd see her with her cane, her blind cane, and still they would see and still not do anything. So that's one area that, so we switched them to Metro Access and the service was a lot better. You know, the difficulty as a person of color is you never know whether someone's mistreating you just because they're having a bad day, or they don't like Black people, or you know what. And so having to go through that was, but I had to defend my mother. So whatever happened, I had to, regardless of what their rationale was for their behavior. I've been so blessed to have people in my family, my friends, and with few exceptions, institutions that seem to know how to provide care for elderly people or people with dementia. When I was outside of that bubble, I relied on my strength to speak up and stand up for my people. So for the most part, our interactions with people and organizations allowed us the ability to be out and about, be safe, to enjoy life. And when that was not the case, I had to flex my muscle to take care of my mother and brother. We finally had to find an adult home for my mother and William after my doctor instructed me not to pick up anything heavier than 10 pounds. And I had been lifting two people who weighed a lot more than 10 pounds. I remember when they first went in, when she first went into hospice, there was a hospice nurse who would come to my house to see my mother, and my mother would hide her pills under her tongue. And then I figured this out one day when she kept moving her mouth around, and I said, lift up your tongue, mother. Here were these pills sitting under her tongue. And I said, you have to take this, because when she didn't, she'd have these hallucinations. And this nurse decided to tell me that my mother would, she called me out on my porch. I said it was like taking me out to the woodshed. She called me out on my porch to tell me that my mother didn't have to take those pills because she was in hospice. And I said to her, my mother has to take those pills because we live in the same house together. And I can't get up all night, So yes, she does. No, she just was irate about I was wrong, and I could not force my mother to take, and I was like, okay. So I called her supervisor and said, she needs to not come here again, because this is my house, this is my mother, and I don't want my mother hallucinating when she has some pills that will help with that. And my mother didn't like her anyway because she used profanity, and my mother usually didn't curse, which was why it was so surprising when Dawn told her to get her ass off that toilet. She thought it was funny. But so the hospice supervisor took care of that and took her. She didn't come back again. But again, flexing my muscle was what was required. So we found an adult family home for Mother and William. Both of them had been in wheelchairs. Broke my heart to move them away from us, but I had no other choice because of my own physical limitations. And I was hesitating to tell Mother about it. And when I did, Mother said, so when do we need to be ready to go? You've done your best to take care of us, and we appreciate that. I mentioned earlier how much I had to learn to get resources available. And when Mother was nearing the end of her life, the Seattle Times did a story about us. And I want to show you the picture of my mother at that point. So this is a Seattle Times photograph at the adult family home. Very different than how she had started out, but still my mother. And I loved her. My mother had a hospice friend who would come and sit with her. And that friend was with her when she died. I was not. I felt so bad about that for the longest time, because I had always wanted to be there when my mother made her transition, but that didn't happen. My friend says it's because your mother knew you well enough to know you wouldn't be able to take that, but I still felt bad about it. I guess, as Ashley Brilliant once said, she lost her will to suffer. I miss my mother, and I'm grateful for the support that we received from so many dementia-friendly people and communities. It made the last years of her life peaceful and rewarding, and everybody deserves that. When I think about how to treat people who have dementia, I remember what we always say at church: love God and love your neighbor like you want people to love you. I know that's a variation of that scripture, but that's the way I say it. Love God and love people the way you want to be loved. Thank you for having me here.
LueRachelle, thank you so very much for those deeply meaningful stories. What an amazing person your mother was, and she raised an amazing daughter.
Thank you.
It's really incredible to hear about that relationship and your experiences together. Thank you. Thank you.
I have to step away to get some tissues. I'll be right back.
Absolutely. I may need to as well. Oh. Well, with those beautiful stories, again, we're setting the stage for what does it mean to have a dementia-friendly community, and what does it look like to have that village that LueRachelle was speaking about, and what does it mean to be able to go out to your faith community or to the Naked Lady Spa or travel, etc., and feel like you are safe and supported and known and included. So again, thank you, LueRachelle, for setting that stage for us. We'll now turn to some discussion, and we have 3 different professionals who work in some of those community sectors that LueRachelle spoke about, who will give a brief response. And that includes Julie Jackson with Richland Parks and Public Facilities Department, Flavia Batteau Walton with the Dementia-Friendly America, Prince George's County effort in Maryland, and Jan Doherty, an author and speaker on dementia-friendly communities. So we'll hear just a brief response from each one of these individuals, and then I'll turn it back to LueRachelle for any final closing remarks. So to begin with, I'd like to introduce Julie Jackson. Julie is the Recreation Manager for Richland Parks and Public Facilities Department. She manages the Richland Community Center, which offers its own programs for seniors and also partners with the Richland Seniors Association for a variety of programming targeting older adults. So Julie, I'd like to welcome you, and each one of our respondents will be sharing from their field what stands out to you from what was shared, and then can you share an example of a dementia-friendly practice or program in your field, so for you community centers or senior centers that you particularly admire. So Julie, go ahead and share your response.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Mary Grace, for putting this together. And LueRachelle, I had to take a second too. So many of your stories resonate with me. Now I'm going to cry thinking about my own grandmother. So I'll try not to talk about her and her experience, but from a Parks and Recreation perspective and running a community center, I mean, so often communities had community centers and senior centers, and, you know, in recent history, trends have shown like cities want to be inclusive. They want to have all different age ranges mixed together, which there's benefits and then there's definitely challenges. So often there's fears, especially among senior population, who are afraid to be around younger kids running through the halls from karate class to dance class. So I think from our perspective, especially, I'll first say we are not by any means the leader in a dementia-friendly community. We should be, we want to be, and we have practices, and I think there's lots of room to grow, which I'm excited about. But we as a staff, I mean, we look towards practicing empathy and understanding that every single person that comes into our building, no matter their age, no matter their background, no matter what they look like, they have an untold story. And so often, you know, it's a customer service position at the front desk of the community center. You may get the worst of somebody, or you may get the best of somebody, and you may not know why you're getting that. So one practice that I appreciate that our staff had when I came on here 3.5 years ago was that sense of curiosity and calmness, where when someone would come up and seem confused or not sure what they were asking for, they would ask questions on those questions to try to help this person. They also acknowledge people coming into the building and throughout the facility, keeping an eye on everyone and saying, hey, are you doing okay? Do you need anything? And knowing when someone looks confused and having that recognition. I don't know if we've ever had any formal training, but recently we sent our entire staff through mental health first aid training, which was phenomenal. And I think that correlates to a lot of what practices we can learn through becoming dementia-friendly communities, is giving that benefit of the doubt, not taking somebody for face value because you don't know what's going on with them that day. They may have moments of clarity and they may have lots of moments of cloudy confusion. And what can we do? We've had many scenarios where our staff has paired someone up, whether it's a young child or an older adult, with their caregiver, and taking note of who's coming in with who. So it's just an awareness that we practice daily. And coming out of COVID, we were closed for 18 months. And I lost some staff to other positions. They moved out of town. And so we just didn't rehire until recently. And I thought about, okay, we're coming out of a really traumatic time for everyone. What are we looking for in staff members? And what stood out to me was we're looking for empathetic, kind individuals. I can teach somebody how to run a point of sale system. We can teach somebody how to register someone for a class. But it's really hard to teach a natural ability to empathize and understand, but also be calm. So, I changed around our hiring practices and our questions for interviews and gave scenarios of situations. And I painted a very stressful, busy picture of a community center that we're bustling, because one day we'll get back to that. And I looked for them to show me their ability to empathize with the situation, understanding, reading a room and or kind of what they would look for in a room filled with people of different ages and backgrounds and doing different activities. And it was really wonderful to hear some people's responses, and surprising, some people didn't pick up on those subtle cues in those questions. And we hired somebody about a month ago, and she's phenomenal and has shown us her ability to ask some more questions and stay calm and try to figure people out. And I think that's something that we strive for. We all have our missteps certain days, I'm sure, because somebody might rub us the wrong way. And just like LueRachelle's example of sometimes it takes the right person to get someone off the toilet, sometimes it takes the right person to connect with somebody. And we know that we call on each other to sub someone out. If we get pushed back and all of a sudden our human side comes out, we get defensive, and we just kind of ruined that conversation with somebody, and we're not going to win them over or help them out. We draw on our peers and our, not just a supervisor, but other people in the building, our staff, to help out in a situation to find that understanding or build trust. We've got a wide range of ages on our staff. And I had one of my team who she's on the older spectrum, but she said, let me talk to them. I'm closer to their age. I'll be able to help out. And it was so true, because she just stood up and volunteered for that. And the amount of mutual respect and confidence that the person had in that staff member was surprising and really wonderful, because it ended up in a positive situation. So those are some of the things I thought of, and I truly appreciate conferences like this, information being shared. I've already gotten quite a few resources and a really wonderful poem. Thank you, LueRachelle, to share with my own mother, who was a caregiver for my grandmother. So I appreciate everything you're doing, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Julie. So appreciate you being here and providing your perspective from that community center and senior center angle. Next up, we have Dr. Flavia Batteau Walton. Dr. Walton leads the South County Action Team for Dementia-Friendly America, Prince George's County in Maryland. And this was one of the original Dementia-Friendly America communities. Dr. Walton has spearheaded a number of vital initiatives, including a focus on empowering faith communities to better support people with dementia and their loved ones. Dr. Walton, welcome. And again, I invite you to share on what stood out to you from the keynote address, and is there one dementia-friendly program or practice that you might highlight from your field?
Thank you so much, Mary Grace, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this conference, this very important conference. And LueRachelle, thank you so much. I had to get tissues as well. Your story resonated so closely with my experiences, and I think we could probably co-author a book. We need to talk about that. I too have been a caregiver, and as LueRachelle alluded to very beautifully, in the African-American community, the family operates perhaps a little differently, because the extended family becomes part of the nuclear family. So I grew up in a situation where there were 3 houses with contiguous backyards. Great aunt, my grandmother, and then my parents. So I grew up between the three houses, which was wonderful. A lot of perks to being an only child in that situation. However, when people started getting sick and needing care, another friend who's an only child says, yeah, there's a payback to all of that. So the payback began. But it was not just a payback, it was a privilege to be able to care or to participate in the care of each one of these individuals. My great aunt suffered from Lewy body dementia. So every summer, my late husband was career military officer. So we moved around a lot. So every summer while she was ill, I would come and spend 6 weeks with my parents to help relieve them of their care, because my mother had made a promise. And this was something that happened a lot in the African-American community as well. You know, don't put me in a nursing home. Do not put me anyplace else, you know. So the promises were made, and those promises were often the cause of people dying themselves because of the stress and because of the lack of attention to their own self-care and medical care. So it eventually got to the point that I had to make an executive decision for my mom, because my mother had had a heart attack at that point. Her health was starting to fail. And my parents were older parents. They were in their 40s when I was born. So they were not physically able to do all that they were doing. So living in a different place, it ended up that I was traveling back and forth between Maryland and Arizona, sometimes 4 times a month, just to oversee the care, because I became the de facto care provider, even at a distance. So the church became central to the village. My parents had lived in Arizona, pardon me, for many, many years. And there was a very, very important village of which they were a part. And the church was central to that. So at the time, my great aunts and my mother's health became the point where my mother could no longer really take care of my great aunt. And I had to make a decision to place my great aunt someplace where she could receive the kinds of care that she needed. The church became very central, and they became my eyes and ears, actually, because members of the church, friends within the church, set up a schedule where they would go see about my aunt in the nursing home. They made sure if my mother needed to shop or whatever, they would take her shopping. They would bring groceries by. They would give my dad relief. They'd bring meals, because my dad had always been the cook in the family. My mother did not like to cook, so she didn't. But they were just vital to taking them places when I could not be there. But by the time after my mother died, many of their friends and part of that village had also either become unable to do the things that they'd done before. Their children had moved them away to be with them, or they had died. So I had no choice but to bring my dad to live with me, because there was nothing left that was familiar to him or that could really care for him. So he spent the last 5 years of his life living with us, which was great, but there's a downside to that as well. When you move someone at that point, especially in early stages of dementia, and you move them to a different environment, it can have a negative impact. And although my mom and dad had visited us many, many times, knew the house, knew our friends, and all of our friends called them Nanu and Bumpa. Those are the names that my children had called them. So they became Nanu and Bumpa, and really surrogate parents, not only to the folks that they had taught many, many years ago in Arizona, but also to my friends and to my children's friends as well. So the village replicated itself when I brought my dad here. The church remained a very, very integral part of the village. LueRachelle mentioned becoming a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. That's my church as well. And during one of the sacraments, during communion, the officers take communion together. Well, I was an officer in the church, so I took communion at the first table. Well, it got to the point where people, my friends at church, would line up to take my dad to take communion with them because he could not go to the first table with me. So there again, people just kind of rose to the occasion and became supportive and loving. I was traveling a lot for work. They would come visit, make sure he was cared for so that my husband didn't have to become the babysitter, so to speak. And then my husband's health started to fail. And there was a competition, as LueRachelle mentioned, a competition for her time. Well, I was being pulled from both sides. And although my dad was in a very, very loving and wonderful medical daycare program at that time, he fell and broke a hip. So he ended up in a nursing home. But there again, people from church, people from other organizations to which I belong became part of that very integral village that helped support his care. So the village is important. Making sure you have a village wherever you are. The village becomes a part of your extended family. And the church is certainly central to all of that. So that's what I would add.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walton. And I'll say, if all of you here attending would like to hear more about faith communities and the role they can play in building a dementia-friendly community, Dr. Walton will be presenting in a breakout session today on that topic. So stay tuned if you'd like to hear more. All right, and last but not least, we have Jan Doherty. Jan Doherty is a nursing expert and leader in dementia care. She's an author and speaker on dementia-friendly communities, and she's at the forefront of the dementia-friendly community movement, making Tempe, Arizona, the first dementia-friendly community in Arizona. She's written a new book, Travel Well with Dementia, Essential Tips to Enjoy the Journey, giving a guide to families and people with dementia about planning and executing successful travel experiences. So she's here today to provide a response as well. Jan, go ahead.
Thank you so much for allowing me to join. And LueRachelle, thank you for your story. And I so appreciate that your focus is on living well. Your focus in caring for your mom was her living fully, living joyfully, and building on success. And I really think that that is the basis of what makes dementia-friendly communities just so important and really resonates with my heart. As a nurse, I don't see this as a disease or a burden, rather an opportunity of humanity, of how do we continue to find worth and value in people who are changing but are still people until they draw their last breath. And I'm really delighted to talk about maybe aspects of travel. When I started going down this line of work, my medical colleagues were saying, why are you talking about travel? Why are you writing a book about travel? Well, it's about living well. And there's so many things we can do as we travel through life and within our own community. It doesn't mean you have to go to Hong Kong and Singapore and all those places that LueRachelle, had the opportunity to take her mom. It might be just across town for some, but it's about staying connected to people that we love. It's about continuing to experience life in a way that produces a sense of wellness and well-being, not only for the person living with dementia, but for care partners as well. So as I think about travel and kind of drawing upon LueRachelle's story of her mom and success, several things stand out to me. One is that we continue to be teachers and advocates. Whether we're a care partner journeying with our loved one who is living with dementia, or we're a professional and this is the world that we live in, we have to be advocates and we have to be teachers. We cannot assume that people should get it and that they should know it. And that includes our family members. As I've worked so many years over the years with families, they they often think, well, they should get it, or parents who don't want to quote unquote burden their adult children. Well, we're family, and this is what families do, is we care for each other. And if we don't, as LueRachelle did, she went out and got her own peeps, right? So sometimes we don't have families. Sometimes we have to create a psychological family. And so it goes with travel as well. We have to find our peeps that will help us be successful as we journey in our community and even outside of that. So it really speaks to me about the importance of the role that we have of letting these people know how they can help. Because in my experience, actually, most people do want to help. They just don't know how. And let's face it, dementia is just different, right? It requires a whole different skill set because the memory and thinking abilities are changing. And so we have to be very specific. So I love that, LueRachelle, as you shared about your mom and her fear of infection. How would I deal with that, especially now, taking her out where everybody's wearing a mask? And that might add to her fear. Or mid-flight, she becomes very anxious because she misperceives perhaps the environment that she is in. So how is it that I provide her with some coping strategies during those periods of time? And again, as a care partner, I've often learned those things about my family member, but then how do I apply it mid-flight? How do I prepare perhaps my niece who's traveling with me not to correct my mother and tell her, no, there aren't little animals crawling around, right? And scold her, but rather, how do I divert her knowing that she loved music? Or that perhaps, come on, Grandma, let's say a prayer together. I feel frightened too, and we're going to do this together, right? So I think about how do we prep our peeps that are going to join us during travel to be present and to be able to provide comfort and well-being. And I've been real impressed with the travel industry. It is lagging, and there is tremendous ageism when it comes to travel, and yet who travels most? Older adults do. And so again, I would say all of us in this dementia-friendly movement have to become teachers and advocates in this field. Because they often don't know what to do. So some things that are happening nationally, and actually SeaTac was one of the very first airports to adopt the Sunflower Lanyard program. And if you haven't seen this actually came out of the United Kingdom, where they have been on the forefront of dementia-friendly communities. But these lanyards are bright green with sunflowers. And it just indicates that this is a person with a hidden disability who needs some added patients, who need some added support during travel. So I encourage people to look at that within their own airport that perhaps they fly in and out of. You know, many people don't know that through airports, the TSA has a support specialist, and we can call ahead to let them know that we're going to need added assistance. Now, in some of the smaller hubs, they're not available, but they will notify TSA agents that Jan and her mom are traveling through today, and she's going to need some added time. But in larger hubs, support specialists might even meet you in ticketing and accompany you all the way through. And I think about this for people who don't want to use a wheelchair, right? Especially when they don't have insight into their illness and they don't need this. Well, the support TSA agent can companion this person through the security process. But another thing I would educate, because we are educators and advocates, is that as a care partner, you have the right to stay with your person through the security process at all points during travel. You cannot be separated. And so we will have to advocate, make that very clear, but in a very nice way, then offer to the TSA agent, here are things that will help you be more successful with my loved one to go through the security process. People will tell you time and time again that this is the most stressful part of travel, at least airline travel, as it relates to them. The other thing I'm reminded of is that, you know, travel can still happen even when we can no longer travel. And for many people, travel is a big part of their life experience. And I'm reminded of a woman and her husband. She had early onset Alzheimer's disease. She was an art history major. She had always dreamed of going to Paris. And then she, you know, life got in the way. She had 5 kids, no money, college tuition. And then she had early onset Alzheimer's disease, and they were going to travel to France. And she had so much anxiety. Family determined this was not going to happen. So what did the children do? And the husband, they planned a night in Paris for her. They brought Paris to her. They recreated in the backyard, you know, the Parisian meal and the music and the art, and they visited the Louvre virtually, and they had a beautiful time creating travel. And so I encourage families to think about, don't let travel stop, even when travel will stop for all of us, right? We can travel through our senses and through our minds and through revisiting experiences that are fun. You know, there's a great movement happening in the travel space called Dementia-Friendly Airport Work Group, actually, that it runs out of Minnesota. So if anybody's interested, please email me. But right here in Phoenix, I'm working with Sky Harbor Airport to become dementia-friendly. We are launching Dementia Friends training now for 400 navigators. These are volunteers through the airport, again, because they have more time and can interface with a variety of travelers through the airport. And then we're going to continue on with airport personnel. These are all people who are hired by the city of Phoenix, and the mayor has given us permission to educate them as well. We created our chapel as a quiet space for people who are traveling with dementia or other hidden disabilities and who really need to get away from the chaos often that creates in these places. So that's just kind of a little sliver of what's happening. But I'd invite you, if you're interested and want to get your airport more involved in this area. But as LueRachelle mentioned, you know, there's transportation. There's so many sectors within travel where people can use added education, knowledge, and support. Because I think at the end of the day, we all want to be successful in our lives, and we really do want to help people to live well. I think that is at the basis of humanity. So thank you for letting me join this incredible program today.
Thank you, Jan, so much and what you bring to it. Appreciate that. We have a few more minutes, and I want to turn back to LueRachelle. You've already shared so much with us, but I wanted to give you the mic one more time if there's any other closing remarks you'd like to offer.
Well, I appreciate the people on the panel speaking. Flavia, we have to write our book because there are people in the chat who are ready to buy it. So that's the first thing. And I appreciate the comment that caring for someone with dementia is an opportunity to find worth and value in people who are not the same as they were, but it's our opportunity. And that resonates with me. I have a cousin whose wife was bedridden and silent for 30 years from MS, and he cared for her so much. And I said to him, how do you do that? And he said, I think it's God's opportunity to help me learn to love people who can't love me back. So that resonated with me. I love the idea of hiring for empathy. I think that probably should be a requirement at some point in our lives for being able to live, that we have to develop empathy for some people. I'll talk to God about that and see if I can arrange that. I too promised my family that I would not put them in a nursing home. I think we make promises based on what we think we can do, what we think we know at the time. And sometimes that's not an option for us to say, I won't do that. So that broke my heart. The first one I went to, I was so depressed. I went out in the parking lot. I was just sobbing. And my husband said, what's the matter? And I said, I can't put my mother in that place. He said, this is the first one we've looked at. It's okay. But it's those promises that we make to ourselves that sometimes we as caregivers have to release. I just offer that to you. For those of you who have made that promise, we do the best we can, and then sometimes life shows up as something else. My mother, someone mentioned travel and how they can have people can have a panic attack on the plane. My mother was claustrophobic, and we were on our way someplace, and the plane was stuck on the tarmac, and she had a claustrophobic attack. But the plane the people, the flight attendants opened the back door of the plane and let her sit there until the plane was ready to take off. I'm sure they had to get permission, but they did it. And so that's what I think of when I think people are being empathetic and understanding what's going on. So I encourage those of you who are caregivers or who are considering becoming caregivers, that you do the things that you want to do while you can do them. Because sometimes you feel like you're on lockdown and you'll need those memories to sort of get you through that. So I'm glad I traveled. Karen Winston, who's one of the organizers for this conference, may know Dr. Joy Hardiman, and Joy and I are age mates, and we travel all over the world. We've been to Timbuktu together. We've been to all over the world. And we keep saying we're going to get as much travel in as possible while we can, because that's what's important to us. And I know travel is not important to everyone, but whatever is important to you as a caregiver, I just hope that you will do that while you can. Give yourself that gift. And thank you for all these resources you've shared with me today. I've been taking notes so that I can look up the Sunflower Lanyard and the personalsafetynet.org. And I'm going to read Jan's book. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you again so much, LueRachelle. So appreciate you and your moving stories. Very, very touching. And we have just a few minutes. We're going to wrap up this session at 10:15, but I do want to give a chance for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So feel free to type a question into chat if you have one on your mind, and I'll direct it to our panelist or keynote presenter. I did see one, and I know Flavia responded to it as well, but in case folks aren't on the chat, I thought I would just pose the question of, if you don't have a faith community, that faith communities were touched on as a place to kind of create a village, but if you don't have a faith community, what are some other ways to build a village? And Flavia, I'm wondering, do you mind just sharing verbally what you shared in chat?
Oh, certainly. Villages are not exclusive to faith communities. Any place you go, it can be a dog park, it can be a civic association, it can be an organization to which you belong. It can be neighbors, it can be, people you meet in the supermarket. It's a matter of extending yourself, meeting people, and just establishing a friendship. You'd be surprised at how many people are just willing to help, and that if you extend yourself, people are willing to reciprocate. And before you know it, that person introduces you to someone else, and it just continues to snowball. So part of it is just not being afraid to extend yourself and to reach out. And sometimes it's just a matter of letting people know, I need help. Who can help me? Who can support me in this? And it's amazing how people are generally very, very willing to extend themselves to one another. Libraries are a good place. Any place people gather. Starbucks. That's something that I know all of you in Seattle know about. Starbucks, but Starbucks is a good place. Always people in Starbucks. And always people with conversation. So just, getting into a conversation with people can be the start. So just don't be afraid to reach out and to extend yourself.
Thank you. All right, I'm just checking if there's any other last question.
Oh, I just wanted, if I may, I wanted to make just a kind of a funny comment about travel. I tried very hard to get my parents to travel, but my mother never wanted to travel. She did not like to fly. So she had this thing. I said, "Oh, come on, Mom, let's go such and such a place." She said, "If the good Lord had meant for me to fly, he would have given me wings." He said, "But he told me, I'm coming for you. He didn't tell me to meet him halfway." So
I have one for you, Flavia. My brother-in-law, my husband tried to get my brother-in-law to fly from Louisiana to Seattle. And my brother-in-law said, "God said, lo, I will be with you always. He never said hi."
These are amazing.
That's the first chapter in our book, LueRachelle.
You got it. I want to see this book before September 2022. Very excited about it.
Oh my.
All righty. Well, I want to again extend gratitude to our keynote presenter, LueRachelle Brim-Atkins. Thank you so much, LueRachelle, for sending us off at this conference. It's such a beautiful, beautiful group of stories, hearing about your mother, hearing about your experience in that relationship and your village. It really just sets the tone for all the themes that we're hoping to touch on throughout the next today and tomorrow. So thank you so much. Thank you also to our respondents, Julie, Dr. Walton, and Jan. Thank you for what you added. Really appreciate you being here. So another round of applause. Wish we could be together in person, but just imagine you're hearing our applause echoing in the hall.